in order to optimally use protein that you're eating, you have to have adequate mineral nutriture concurrent with that. Intracellular minerals like potassium and magnesium and phosphorus are extremely important to be contained, and there are lots of examples of ketogenic diets where people have given particularly protein isolates. So again, vegetable protein isolates, I mean, they're great, but make sure they have the potassium, phosphorus, and magnesium with them. Otherwise, it's not well formulated and it's not going to work well, and people can eat everything right and lose lean body mass. And then the most obvious one is salt. If you are sodium restricted, then your body is going to waste potassium. That the renin-aldosterone system in the adrenal and between the adrenal and the kidney will, if you don't have enough sodium, the body has to retain sodium in any way it can to maintain circulatory volume, and in so doing, it'll sacrifice potassium. And so these are all, again, we get around to balance and and so a well-formulated ketogenic diet is not just about macronutrients, but also the other associated requirements that need to be in balance for this to work well. And the best way to do that is don't eat anything that has more than 5 ingredients, and hopefully was still attached to roots or was still breathing less than 5 days ago. But one of the things we got from our registry that was reported at the American Diabetes Association meeting is that we tracked for the last 3 years all of the patients in our treatment cohort who developed COVID. And when they told us they developed COVID, then we asked them to tell us if they were hospitalized. We asked them to have them, if they or their families would tell us if they required intensive care treatment. And we tracked mortality. And we did lose, I think, less than 10 patients out of like 1,400 of our patients who developed COVID. And most of these people had diabetes, which meant their prognosis was worse than average. And we had a modest number who were in the intensive care unit, but most of those 1,400 did not require any form of acute medical care. So we either have a truly remarkable group of people who, somebody's looking after them, or nutritional ketosis and reducing inflammation suppresses this thing called the cytokine storm. You've written a book. We were actually writing another book of how to do it, which became our patient treatment manual. And we plan to put this together and franchise it to medical practices and train those physicians and their staff how to do it. But our experience before we met Sarah Hope for a year trying to work with medical practices just to do a study convinced us that we had to do this whole hog. So we arranged for our own medical practice group. We learned to do virtual medical care, and we had 3 years of practice at virtual medical care before it became a necessity with COVID. Chance benefits of prepared mind, so maybe my mind was prepared, but I was not prepared for it to go like this, and I'm just thrilled to be here. When you go beyond 2 days, the published literature is to a great extent conflicting with what you read on the internet. Particularly around effects on resting metabolic rate and preservation of lean body mass. And this is not my research. I learned this from people, and I met some of the people who did this in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. But what they demonstrated is after 2 or 3 days of total fasting, you get through the initial phase of catecholamine-driven response, where metabolic rate actually does go up. And there's no loss of lean mass based on measuring the body's excretion of protein breakdown products. But by day 3, protein breakdown products in the urine start coming out. And I've done studies where we've done this with the ketogenic diet to help determine what is the protein requirement to maintain lean body mass when you're a ketogenic diet. And people who I spoke with yesterday in the breakout room, we discussed the fact that the recommended dietary allowance in the U.S. is 0.8 grams per kilogram of reference body weight. For the ketogenic diet, you need 1.5 grams per kilo. We did that by measuring nitrogen balance, protein in, breakdown products coming out. How do you maintain or improve lean body mass? And that's the amount one needs with a ketogenic diet. When you feed no protein and no calories, by the fourth or fifth day, the average healthy, otherwise healthy person is losing something on the order of 3/4 of a pound of lean body mass per day. And when you get out to a month, it's a 1/4 pound still. And studies have been done, but not just on whether a person stays alive, but what happens to strength and function. And for instance, hand grip strength goes down at a month measurably when you do that. And resting metabolism starts going down. At the end of the first week, it's down about 10%. And at the end of a month, it's down over 20%. And what nobody has studied that I know of is when you finish a fast for a month and resting metabolism is significantly decreased, how long or to what degree over the next months does that come back up to or above previous baseline? The data's, I don't know if the data's there. If it's there, I would love to read it. But in the meantime, I think we need to be cautious about long-term total fasting. I have absolutely no problem with time-restricted feeding. I have no problem with total fasting up to a couple days. All those changes can be recovered within a subsequent week without any apparent illness. Well, if somebody has a terminal brain cancer and their life expectancy is measured in a matter of a couple months, total fasting may extend their lives. And I have no problem with that. But it really has to be on a very carefully assessed risk-benefit ratio. It's a well-established fact that for people my age, I'm over 50.
Really?
That protein requirement to maintain lean body mass is increased relative to the basic relative or recommended dietary allowances. It turns out that when you refeed somebody who has lost a lot of lean body mass, and the thing that really kindled my interest in nutrition when I was in medical school and then in my internal medicine training was seeing patients who, to me, were clearly malnourished. And this was in the days before we had tube feeding and total parenteral nutrition. And I could see patients that I was caring for, and we were doing the best we could to reverse their disease, whatever it was, but they were dying of malnutrition. And so the idea that we could actually put a feeding tube in them or put an intravenous line, subclavian line, and give them total parenteral nutrition, that is all their nutrients as glucose, fat, and amino acids, was revolutionary. And when we had severely malnourished patients and we plugged them into this feeding, the fastest we could get them to gain lean tissue was 2 to 4 ounces of lean body mass per day. The use of these is out in front of the public data, or getting out way in front of published data. That doesn't mean that those experiences aren't valid, but it means that we have to be careful about generalizability, because clearly some individuals respond very differently than other individuals attempting the same thing. So if you have a person who's done extremely well on a ketogenic diet and they'd say to everyone else on their team, hey, it worked for me, you do it too, it probably isn't going to be universally beneficial or effective. The other problem we have is if somebody has figured out something that works uniquely well for them, and you ask them, how come you're winning all these events, and they're a professional and they're getting paid to do that, they're not going to tell you, and we can't ask them that. I mean, there is a skier named Lindsey Vonn who dominated women's downhill skiing. All three, downhill, giant slalom, for 7 or 8 years. In the last 4 years, she was essentially full keto. But why would she tell anybody? I mean, and for the reason she said she did it, she didn't need to lose weight. She didn't need it for endurance, because she said if my event lasted longer than 2 minutes, I'd lose. Yeah. But apparently, and again, I have heard this is all secondary information, but I have heard that the reason is that her volume of training could be doubled without becoming stale and going off peak, and her training, her season would last for 8 months, from the earliest snowfall in the Alps to wherever. And she had to maintain high volume training throughout that to maintain peak. And she said, I could just out-train my competitors because my recovery time was so much better. The ultra runners that we have studied tell us that they train low, they may or may not eat some low glycemic the night before, and then they will oftentimes use strategic carbs in race. Any event lasting longer than 3 hours, individuals will oftentimes use some form of carbs where they're providing, typically what they evolve to is about 10% of their total energy expenditure coming in as carbs during the event. And when we look at what ultra marathoners burn when we put them on and these are people who are trained to run 100-kilometer, 100-mile distances, and we put them on a treadmill at race pace for 3 hours, they end up running a marathon on a treadmill, in a basement room in the lab, staring at a blank wall. I mean, talk about masochism. What they tell us, and what we measure, is that they're burning 90% fat for that whole 3 hours, and that the 10% being burned as carbs would be the amount that they have figured out just from their own instincts that they need to take, and if they're going to do an event longer than 3 hours.
Yeah, so that's pretty consistent with the athletes I train. So they might burn 1,200 calories an hour at their long-distance race pace, and they might be taking, 25, 30 grams of carbohydrate an hour, 120 calories. It's about what you're thinking, right? And that would be very different than the carb-heavy athletes who might be chucking down 100 or 120 grams of carbohydrate an hour.
Elite, I look after elite AFL football teams, and I have individuals who are completely ketogenic, who are absolutely fine. I have others who struggle with, who are train low, compete high, so they'll be ketogenic during the week or low carb, and then top up on their heavy training days and so on. So very, very varied. And